Great day, everyone. Welcome to our course on Systems Analysis in Educational Management, or you may simply put it as Schools Systems Analysis. I am your instructor, Sir Ivan Brian El Indactivo, and I am very much happy and delighted to have you in this course. So let's start. Our course is Systems Analysis, and it intends to understand the nature and the structure and the components as well of a system. And in particular, we are referring to the educational system here. There are many systems in our society, and this will concentrate on the nature, the attributes, and even the components and aspects of a school's system. So, we will be discussing different modules on this course. And the first module that I would like to share with you will be on understanding the key concepts and terms that are attributed to a system. So, are you ready? Let's start. I have here a presentation on school systems analysis on module 1, understanding some concepts and terms used in systems analysis. The objective of this first lecture is to simply define and explain the meaning of some terms used in systems analysis, as well as identify the various factors or even variables that interact within a closed or open system. So, system, when we say a system, and we start of course with the concept of a system, we talk about a series of entities or things, whether animate or inanimate, which interact with each other and may produce a certain output born from the process that they employ. There are, of course, functions, interrelation, and structure within that system. So, other reference may define a system as a complexity and interrelation of different elements with mutual interaction. That in such a way it has a regulated or constrained action towards a certain purpose or intention. The system is designed in order to accomplish a certain output or accomplish a certain purpose why this system is in the first place developed. So, simply stated, I have here the definition. System is a set of interrelated elements that function as a unit for a specific purpose. So, again, the key term here is interrelation of elements that has a structured function and intended for a specific end or goal or purpose. So when we talk about a system, we are also talking about its components or the entire process of a system, or simply what we call as the input, output, and the process. So input, process, output will be the chronological order of this. And I believe you have encountered this several times in other discussions, in other texts, or even in researches, that the basic paradigm or working paradigm that they have is an IPO framework that starts with an input, process, and output. So, aside from this basic framework, a system may also employ what we call a loop, a feedback mechanism, a feedback that results from the output and generates an assessment on the process that had been made and infuse another set of information to become its new input to be considered in the process to generate a new set of output. So this is a loop or a cycle that constantly, let's say, checks and balance or improves the entire system. Okay. But if you have encountered complexities in other systems, or let's say systems that doesn't simply rely on input, process, and output. If we will be expanding this system may include suppliers or sources of data, information, or other sources of resources. And the last, or the bottom line of this system, will be the clientele or the customers. So the entire framework here will show a SIPOC or a SIPOC process or a SIPOC framework. It starts with a supplier, and then the input, process, output, and ends with the customer. So let's discuss each of these attributes or each of these component. What do you mean by these components? So when we talk about inputs are usually materials, human, financial, or even information that serve as raw materials in the transformation process, or even in the process itself. It is the basic resource that you need to use in order to produce the product or to render the service intended. Okay? So inputs may be let's say, certain policies, certain materials, certain resources that you have, or what we call, you can identify it as the three M's: the manpower, materials, or money, or even machinery for the fourth M, or the three P's like people, physical resource, and peso for the purpose of in the context of the Filipino. So nonetheless, when you say input, again, these are necessary resources used in order to produce the product or render the service later on. Okay. The next part will be the process. Okay. The process may be a form of a cycle, a thought process, a transformation process, or even, let's say, the throughput that we talk about that employs different techniques, strategies, interventions in order to transform the input into an output. Okay, that's why it's a throughput. Okay, other books coined it in that manner. So, in our school, for example, the process will involve the interaction between teachers and students. The teaching and learning process itself is the transformation process by which the students are informed, are educated, and honed as successful citizens of our society. So that entails process. The next on the IPO basic framework will be the output. Of course, when we say output, the word already implies it. This is already the products or services that had undergone the process and sourced out from the, of course, input. So when you say output in an educational system, you might refer this to our graduates, our students who already accomplished and finished the entire program and graduated from the program, of course, and have acquired the competencies expected from them. The interrelation between the input and the output are very much relevant in this setup. The output is only limited to the input and the process that had been implemented or infused in the system. So you cannot generate output that is beyond the limits of what a process and an input can only provide. So the output of an organization, again, it is relative to the process and input that we have included. So after the output, you'll notice here there's a loop here, the feedback, and not necessarily part of a system, but instead this is relative to the input, process, and output, whether there's a continuous feedback loop or let's say a continuous improvement mechanism that is embedded in the system. So when we say feedback, this is an information concerning the output or even the process itself that intends or may lead to certain improvements or intervention or changes, both in the process or simply to uh, include changes in the output later on. So feedback tells whether a certain plan should be, let's say, pursued, continued, modified, or let's say ceased, or simply to end. Okay. For this reason, all educational development plans are made on a cycle, a spiral basis, meaning they are subject to certain modification, assessment, revision, changes, depending on the feedback of that process or of that operation. So, feedback is a crucial step on reviewing a certain process or a certain system. And that's how this is, one way or another, deemed necessary by other systems. Okay. And then there's also the expanded attributes or components here, the supplier and the customer. So when we talk about the supplier again are not exclusive to people, but these are sources of information, theory, policy, or in general, resources. This may refer to people when you are looking at the source of the policy or the source of the information or simply the provider of the supplies itself, the materials themselves. Or this may account to systems, other systems that may generate inputs, other system that may cause the input later on. The supplier is the one that, again, provides the source, the key relevant source that you will need in the input. Okay? Or might be the one that triggers or catalyzes the input. So if you have an input of, let's say, material supplies, and the supplier will be the service provider themselves, or the supplier in the literal sense, the supplier of those materials. Okay? Again, the supplier is the source, the input is the actual supply of the supplier in this case. Okay? The last part will be the clientele or the stakeholder or the customer that benefits from the entire system or from the entire process. These are, let's say, beneficiaries of the system or recipients of the output, whether it's a service or a product. Okay? These are the stakeholders that avail of these services and products. Okay? So that's the customer. Okay? So let's imagine in a school system, the supplier will be what? Our administrators, our teachers, our school personnel. The input will be our policy, our curriculum, our learning and teaching content. Okay. The process will include, of course, the teaching and learning process itself, the learning delivery, the teaching pedagogy. And then the output will be the learning competencies learned, acquired, the mastery, of course, the results of the learning outcomes assessment. And the customer will be our students, our learners. And the feedback loop will happen, of course, as every learner undergo the process. This is also a way whether determining if we need to have an enrichment, program for the student or a remediation or intervention on the learning of the student. That is part of the feedback. And again, we look into the appropriate input and infuse it and transform it in the process and use it in the process in order to yield new output. Right? So, let's go on and focus on the process itself. This might not be included in the module that I have shared with you, but most of the process will allude to what we have in the total quality management process. So most of the process that you might see will involve this: the plan, do, check, act cycle. The plan, do, check, act cycle, or the PDCA, is popular in quality management systems. The plan part here, as the word implies, is the development itself, the situational analysis, the strategic development planning itself, and how you structure the entire system. Whether it's an organization, a school, a corporation, the entire planning part, from strategic to investment to operational planning, is this phase. The next part will be the do. The doing is what you have written, you act on it, you do, you practice it, or you implement it. So the doing part is simply the procedures and the process itself that operates in a system. It's the execution of the plan, the implementation of what you have intended. The check part is the audit process. The check is simply checking whether what you have planned was transpired, what you have planned had been done, and if there are some parts that did not transpire as expected or did not happen the way you have planned it. This is the phase where you try to look at it, analyze it, evaluate it. The monitoring and evaluation part of a system lies on the check part. This is where the review comes in. The systems review, the program implementation review, the planning review, or even the monitoring and evaluation itself. After this check, this is where the act comes in. Act is simply a corrective act, a correction of what had been, let's say, a lapse or a lack or a deficit or an error in the system or in the process, or simply a move to continuously improve what you have planned in order to, let's say, revise or modify, alter, or improve the entire process. So the act part is the continuous improvement phase that will allow us, after the review, to devise a new plan, catapult a new strategy, or let's say trigger or catalyzes a new way of doing things. So the act is simply to act on what you have observed, what you have reviewed, what you have assessed or analyzed on the check part. So this is usually the continuous cycle of a total quality management process. Okay? Again, the plan, do, check, act. Planning is, again, strategizing and developing the process. Doing or do is the execution and implementation. Check is the review, the audit, the monitoring and evaluation. And act will be the continuous improvement part. Okay? In other process paradigm, you might encounter what we have, the AAA, the assess, analyze, and act. This is common in the continuous improvement programs or continuous improvement project. Assess part here will simply allude also to the planning part. It tries to look into the situation, both the top-down and bottom-up approach. When you say top-down, bottom-up approach, the top-down looks into assessing what is the nature of the institution, the mandate of the institution, the vision, mission of the institution, if you have quality objectives, the core values, and the philosophy of the institution. It also meets up the situation of the institution. The bottom-up approach here will represent the situation or the situational assessment, whether you have certain concerns, inputs and outputs of your stakeholders, internal and external issues. This is the assess part. And then out of this top-down and bottom-up factors, you proceed to what we call analyze. The analyze will employ root cause analysis, SWOT analysis, situational analysis that will allow you to generate and infer what will be the courses of action that you will plan or put into place to address what you have assessed. Assess is to look at data and look at the situation. Analyze is to process this data and process this situation into a workable and actionable intelligence or knowledge. And later on, of course, the act part will be the implementation of what you have strategized, what you have developed. And that is the act part. Okay, so it's a triple A: assess, analyze, and act. Okay. Both of these paradigm are usually infused in the process. Okay. So, again, as a summary here, you see the CPOC and the feedback paradigm of a system. Now, the system doesn't end there because the system may be only a part of a bigger system, or let's say the super system or the supra system that we know that has even subcomponents or subsystems within it. So you need to understand the nature, the scope of this kind of system. So maybe you have encountered these terms: the suprasystem, the subsystem, and the boundaries between this system is of course called as system boundaries. Okay? And we also have where these boundaries and this supra and subsystem are situated. We call them the environment. Now let's look into this. When you say environment, this is the overall surrounding, as the word environment, surrounding the system or the organization, the institution. So when you say environment, I hope this will help in analyzing the environment. It will consist of these components, the PESEL. What's the PESEL? The PESEL stands for, it's an acronym, stands for political, environmental, social, technological, legal, and economic. If you wanted to add educational, where in the first place we are the educational we are in the educational system, that might be included. Again, political, environmental, or even educational, social, technological, legal, and economic component. So these factors impinge on the system and influences the system, especially on how the system works. Now, when we say system, the suprasystem again is the largest of the system. You call it a suprasystem because it includes other systems within it or subsystems within it. The suprasystem may be the entire society. It consists of a political system, educational system, cultural, or even economic system within it. And this is the macrocosm or the macro system that we call. On the other hand, when you say subsystem, The subsystem is of course, the component system within the suprasystem, or within a system. It has its own purpose. That's why you call it a system. But this purpose, or its parts and components are determinative, or you might say, influence also by the purpose of the bigger system, or the entire suprasystem. So on the other hand, when you say subsystem, this is the microcosmic system, or the micro system, okay, as opposed to the macro system of the suprasystem. Okay. So system boundaries, on the other hand, again, is the one that determines what will be included and excluded in the subsystem separated by the system or the suprasystem. For example, we're referring to the educational system. You might imply that the subsystem here will be on terms of hierarchy: the central, the regional, the division, the district, and the school level. You might also put subsystems, or let's say system boundaries here, with regards to the level of education. You might distribute it in terms of elementary, secondary, and tertiary. So that's the subsystem. And the interplay of these components is very important when we try to look into the stability of the system. Okay? When we say stability of the system, or system stability, it's a condition when all the components are harmonized, or in harmony at all times. However, this is ideal, and this is not always the possible scenario or case, because the changes that occur in the environment or the society, which are not commensurate with the existing conditions of the system. So when we talk about the task of the system, like our school system, we have this task to continuously adjust and improve and adhere to arriving at the stability, or maintaining this stability, the interrelation of the factors and components and elements of the system, whether from the suprasystem to the subsystems, employed the system boundaries, and recognizing the influence of the environment. So that is our discussion on system. So I hope you were able to understand and enlighten yourselves on the different concepts, and I hope you get familiarized as well with these key concepts and terms in understanding the different factors and components of the system, and how we could also implement this, or let's say, place this in the context of our school system. Again, the relevance of a system is that it is an organic whole with a purpose, but at the same time, it is interdependent on other systems that impinges its influence, its role on it. And this nexus of different systems, again, is a total harmony of system, which is relevant in understanding and in the operation of these systems. So it's like a web of components. That's why we call it a nexus. A nexus which recognizes its independence, but at the same time the interdependence of every system to other systems, generating a big picture system, both the forest and the trees. So that ends our module 1, and I hope I was able to render and give justice to our school systems analysis on our first module, lecture 1, in understanding the key concepts of our school systems. Thank you, and see you on our next lecture.